So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. This is what promises to be a very interesting session because all three of the authors here have written extremely interesting books on very interesting aspects of India's political history and India's political life, in a sense. So I'd like to start by asking each of you, and I think since we are sitting like this, we'll start with Abhishek first, why you chose to write the subjects that you did, and what motivated you to choose these specific people and these sort of moments in time.
Hi, am I audible? In my case, two things happened roughly around 2013-14. One on a personal front and another on an overtly political front. On the personal front, for the first time in my life, I actually read some good biographies, which were not hagiographies. I had been reading biographies for very long, but I never took the genre very seriously. And so for the first time, I thought that, it does not have to be a watertight compartment. You can mix biography and history in the way you want to and create a story out of it. But there was something more important happening on the political front, which was that, Mr. Modi had been nominated as the Prime Minister, the old guard had been sidelined, and there was a lot of nostalgia about Mr. Vajpayee, and that was when the idea first came to me. And yet, it came to me not through the public myths about Vajpayee, which you hear that, he was a liberal or he was a great poet or a statesman. I was young and I was arrogant and I was ambitious and a little stupid too. But doing a slightly secondary research, till that time I had not even gone to the archives. But even doing a little bit of secondary research, I saw numbers in a way no one else had, I suppose, seen or chosen to see or explored it in details. Which was that, contrary to the popular cliche that BJP, what we hear is that, BJP did very badly in 84, then they, Masjid Tordi, and then they came to power. Now, there is a lot of truth in that argument. But, if you go back to the earlier decades, the data is staggering. Jan Sangh had 4 Lok Sabha seats in 57, and from there they graduated on to 35 in 67. And from there, during Janata government, they had 90 parliamentarians in Lok Sabha. And at the peak of Janata, between Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, they had more than 100 MPs, nearly about 400 MLAs and MLCs. And I wondered that, it's not a minor party. That means they are much bigger than what Congress is today. And I was very curious about that story. And I thought it was not documented in considerable details. And that is when I went to the archives. And amazingly, I saw that, a lot of the story was unexplored. I saw that much of the current day Sangh Parivar's obsession, everything from Ayodhya to Article 370 to Uniform Civil Code to central legislation against crop protection, all of these obsessions are very, very old. They had been talking about these things in the 40s. And so I thought, also in a very short detail, also what really moved me and that was the moment I decided I was going to work on this book, was one day in my first week in the archives at Teen Murti Library, where all of us have work at the microfilm section. We call it chakri. You have to ghumao the chakri. It's an outdated machine out there. So there I saw something very unique. I saw that, Mr. Vajpayee's father passed away of cancer while he was only a month after he had fought and lost his first election. And a few months later, his mother passed away, again of cancer. And the family was really broke, and Mr. Vajpayee was not earning anything. And I found that detail rather very curious, but also strangely moving in a way. And I thought, and that detail was nowhere on Wikipedia or Quora. So I thought if I could, I could summon up more such details if I got one new fact every week, maybe if I slog on for a while, I might be able to say something new, something of value. And that's how I plunged into Mr. Vajpayee.
Professor Habib?
My work on Maulana Azad was actually not the first one in terms of political lives, writing political lives. I began looking at Shahid Bhagat Singh, one of our most loved revolutionary figures. which was not a biographical account. I dealt with his intellectual history, his ideas. The man as a revolutionary thinker. But Maulana Azad, the latest book, I took it up because mostly because of so many concerns of today. For example, when we see this whole idea of nationalism being interpreted and talked about, whole issue with Islam, not in India, globally, how Islam is being perceived, how the believers themselves have taken their Islam away, far away from what they inherited from their prophet, and different ways of looking at it. And mostly, the most popular way of looking at it is that it's a regressive religion. It talks about hate. No, it is only associated with terrorism. And this is a general belief which has come up in the past 20, 25 years. So I thought Maulana Azad is one figure who is not just a political figure. He's an intellectual, he's a scholar, and he dealt with the whole idea of nationalism in those times. He dealt with Islam. And so in the book, there are 2 chapters dedicated to these 2 things, which are my main concerns. And I try to locate both nationalism as well as Islam. How Maulana Azad, first of all, dealt with Islam. Like Islam, for the believers, is a religion where the believers put Islam at the pedestal. All other religions are somewhere down below. Maulana, while writing his Tarjuman al-Quran, believed that Islam is one of the religions. There are so many, from Hinduism to Judaism to Christianity. And all of them speak about humanity. All of them are concerned about human lives, human values. It is only the believers who take their own religions far away from the ideals which their religions pass on to them. Similar things happened with Islam. And he's tried to say that we have to look at Islam in comparative perspective. Where Islam stands, like he even justified idolatry, image worship in Tarjuman al-Quran. He said, this is only for actually concentration for the believer. While most Hindus are monotheists, they all believe in one God. The creator is one. Go to any religion. All religions are monotheistic religions because all of them believe in one God. They may believe in different images of gods, goddesses. That's something else. But creator is one. So Islam is not alone. So that way he put Islam at a comparative perspective. So that was something which I liked, the whole idea, which I thought one should pass on to people, the young generation should know. Because Maulana Azad is known as a political figure, not as somebody who's, except for scholars who read Islam or who read Maulana Azad in detail. Second is nationalism. Nationalism, because we have never been as nationalist as we are today. No, we are more nationalist than the people who created nationalism for us. And our nationalism is also far away from the forefathers who left this legacy for us. And so Maulana, and I did a book actually on nationalism a few years ago. This was an anthology where Maulana also figured, where nationalism was indivisible, was composite, was empathetic, was eclectic. No, the different names I gave to different chapters, where different political figures, all not just political, people like P.C. Ray. I think this is for the first time any person of history tried to do, bring in a scientist to speak about the idea of nation. So P.C. Ray, he spoke somewhere, a beautiful lecture of his which I used. Now, while doing it, Maulana Azad clearly pointed out that Muslim League is doing disservice not only to India but also to Islam. Because if you go back to the history of Islam, you will find that the Prophet created the first Muslim nation in the world, in Medina, in collaboration with the Jews, the resident Jews of Medina. So it was the first experiment in composite nationalism. in nation building. So if the Prophet can do, why can't Muslims in India do that with the Hindus? What is the problem? So why the Muslim League need to have a nation in the name of two-nation theory? So around this, there is a whole essay he wrote, Islam and Nationalism. Then he spoke at so many places. So all that I tried to handle in this book. One chapter, a detailed one, which talks about that. And there's so many other things. If you go and read the book, you will find it. And last a few minutes is a chapter which I believe is even more important for people who want to know about Maulana Azad, the lighter side of his life. Like Maulana Azad, we should know, was a great connoisseur of music, a great sitar player himself who trained for 3 years with a sitarist, a man who was a great connoisseur of Chinese jasmine tea, never had any other tea. His sessions of tea drinking used to begin at 3 in the morning. That's the time he used to work. And he believed that when the rest of the world sleeps, I work. Then, third, a great ornithologist, amateur ornithologist, who has written about birds, about sparrows, about nightingales, and in great detail. So these are his passions which we see in this book. And I loved doing that, and I hope you will love reading it. Thank you.
Pratinav.
Right, so I also came to history by way of recent events, much like Irfan and Abhishek here, but I'm a bit of an interloper here because I'm not a biographer. So in fact, I'm something of an anti-biographer. So I write about class politics, that's my bread and butter. And one of the reasons why I got into this was precisely to counter biography as a form, which I believe can very often, turn into hagiography and very quickly turn into a very different kind of exercise that I'm against. So in fact, I look at continuities in history. So I want to show that Hindu nationalism isn't something new. The attacks on the free press and secularism, that isn't new either. So, I want to look at things in a longer perspective. So longue durée history is my thing, the 20th and 21st centuries at large. So my first book was called India's First Dictatorship, which was about the emergency of 1975 to 1977. So it was a rather brief period when India was under authoritarian rule, but my basic point was you can look at the periods before and after it, and you'll see a lot of continuities. And I make a similar point with my second book, which is called Another India, which is about Muslim politics from the 50s to the 70s. And I show actually Muslims have had it really hard in India for a very long time. This great secularists you read about, Nehru, but also Azad, I must say, they didn't quite live up to the high standards they set for themselves, understandably so. Well, that said, I think biography is still a very useful genre of writing history. And in a way, I do believe in great man and, great woman history because, you wouldn't have had the emergency without Indira Gandhi. It's quite simple. No Indira Gandhi, no emergency. So really, great people do matter.
Thank you. I think some of the common themes that all three of you have dealt with is nationalism. I think Professor Habib's given us a great detailed explanation about Azad's view of nationalism. But Abhishek, in your book, can you tell us a bit about Vajpayee and his views on the idea of India? Because in many ways, all three of your books deal with the idea of India in different ways, right? So, I mean, for Vajpayee in particular, what was the idea of India? How did that evolve through his political life?
The early Vajpayee was certainly a Hindutva hardliner, and they just no other way of putting it. There were some minor influences. When he was in college, he read Marx, and that flirtation did last a few years, and it comes out in his early poems. I mean, you read his early poems, they are a slightly confused blend of Arya Samaji version of history and Marxism. So he has a poem in which he says, Mughals should be blamed for constructing Taj Mahal with the help of lakhs of Hindu workers. So I mean, in some ways, it's very juvenile, but it also like points out towards the intense baggage, the intense victimhood that he was carrying, and later he became like a spokesperson for many decades of victimhood. Vajpayee remained like that. I mean, in fact, things worsened in 45, 46 after Muslim League did well in the elections, and before long we knew that partition was a certainty. He joined, so he shed whatever little Marxism he knew, and he joined RSS full time. And he was very young, and he helped them float mouthpieces, and that's how their first mouthpiece in Hindi, Rash Dharm, came out. That's how 6 months later Panchjani came out. And his tone in those, if any of you have picked up my book or you see any of his early essays, it is of a rabid Hindutva hardliner. He thinks of all Muslims as traitors. He thinks of all Muslims as fifth columnists. He blames Gandhi entirely for the partition. He thinks, Congress only appease Muslims, and Hindus should not support them. All of that. I think things began in Vajpayee's case, and this went on for a very long time till he became an MP. I mean, the first time he met Nehru, he attacked Nehru's Kashmir policy. But also, gradually, only after he became an MP, things began to change, and some of it was because of his exposure to Parliament. They were a tiny group. There were 4 people out of 540 odd people. And I think over time, the influence that, if you every day sit with 536 people who do not agree, or let's say 500 people who do not entirely agree with you, over time, it makes you rethink your politics. But in Vajpayee's case, I think, and I have dealt, and for the same reason I have dealt about it in my book in a great detail, was that foreign travel really opened him up. For the first time, he was sent to the US by Nehru for a study trip and to attend the UN sessions. And he spent 3 months in America and traveled everywhere. This was year 1960. And for the first time, he saw the poet of Hindu Tanman Mera Parichay, saw proof of a multi-ethnic society functioning, so well. And he saw that, even in small town America, there were people from 40 ethnicities. And it did not seem to be a problem. They were managing fine. And, he would send dispatches from there कि यहाँ हम लोग हिंदू मुस्लिम की बात करते रहते हैं. So gradually there was that shift. But in the final analysis, I would say and I don't want to talk too much about my second volume, which is coming up, and I hope some of you will pick it up, the Babri and the Gujarat riots and so on. But I do think I would judge him a little harshly because every time, the point is not what his personal opinion on nationalism was. People could be privately decent people, and that's why the genre of biography matters. In private, he had many Muslim friends, close friends, and by the end, he was also hosting iftar parties and so on. But the point is something else. The real point is he backed Sangh Parivar all through his career, beginning with 48 until the day he went in coma. For all 5 decades, every time Sangh Parivar or Jan Sangh or BJP was in trouble, Vajpayee rescued them. And he rescued them in front of the parliament. So if you read some of those speeches, you'd realize that he would continue to have a checkered legacy. So on that note, I would say his legacy, when we talk of idea of India, remains checkered in my opinion overall.
Pratinav, your work looks at 1947 to 77, both of your books. I'm sticking to idea of India here. What kind of idea of India do you see evolving between that period, for Indira Gandhi and prior?
Well, obviously, the early post-colonial years were years of great flux, and people tend to think, I hate Nehru and I hate all the early secularists of the 1950s, given the general tenor of my writing, but that's not exactly true. I think they were perfectly decent people. It's just that they were rather incompetent at the same time. So, I mean, Nehru himself was an impeccable secularist and possibly even a socialist, but that's not how his government worked, and which is why I feel we need to push back against the temptation of biography, because there's only so much you can learn about societies from people. And, well, of course, the greatest biographies aren't just the lives of great men, but the life and times, as it were. So it's about placing them in their setting. And when you do that, you realize how frustrated people like Azad and Nehru were by what they saw around them. During Nehru's dying days, he saw his idea of India completely collapse with the Hazrat Bal riots. And 1 in 50 Indian Muslims left India in 1963 and 64. So you see, this was, in a way, a vindication of Pakistan and the two-nation theory, And this comes in the golden age of secularism. So again, there's a big disconnect between the ideas of some of these leaders and the kind of governments they ran. So that's the general point I try to bring out in both my books.
You see, my little disagreement with what you just said was that we need to realize when we look at the freedom struggle, forget about biography, we look at freedom struggle. For me, freedom struggle was like a multi-starrer film. You can't just pick Nehru, Azad, or Patel, or anybody else. They were all part of a team. Congress Party was, in those times, a cocktail where you had left, right, center. Nehru was not just the only secularist there. There were so many other secularists there. But there were so many detractors of Nehru, his own dear friends, colleagues in the Congress Party. So whatever happened because there were people in the party who vouched for different ideas, different ideologies, different future for the people of India. Those who actually opposed the creation of Pakistan among so many Muslims, they were also part of the Congress Party. Second, the Congress Party was, if you talk of Muslims, it was not a party of Ashraf Muslims. Ashraf Muslims, majority of them were with the Muslim League. Congress represented the underprivileged, most of the Pasmanda Muslims we call today. Darul Uloom Deoband and Jamatul Ulama Hind represented not Sayyids and Sheikhs and Pathans, represented Ansaris and Quraishis and Mansuris, all sorts of the majority of Muslims. Sayyids were in minority then, they are in minority now. It is these people, 80%, who represented India. Out of these 80%, more than 80% were with the Congress because of Darul Uloom and Jamatul Ulama Hind. You go to Uttar Pradesh, and I give this example even now. Demographically, Western Uttar Pradesh, which was close to Punjab, which was affected by partition violence and all, 26% Muslims represent the population in Western UP even today. Which means, and I have experimented with people in the families while I was doing this book. If you go to an Ansari family, a Quraishi family, you will find hardly any family which is divided. They have nobody in Pakistan. They don't want to go to Pakistan. They don't line up before the Pakistani embassy. No? Hardly anybody. While no Sayyid family is undivided. All of them are divided, including my own. So the point is, a large number of Muslims decided to be part of India. They decided to declare India their home. And their ancestors. And that's why they hang around here, even now. Whatever is happening to them now is what Jinnah left behind a statement that the Muslims who leave behind will end up their life proving their nationality. Unfortunately, it didn't happen before, but it is happening now in the past couple of years, sadly.
Well, if I may, I think you've really pinned down the real problem with nationalism. You describe it as a cocktail, but it was a terribly badly mixed cocktail, wasn't it? There's really no emulsification there,
Cocktails are not tasty all the time.
No, it's not about it being tasty. It's just that the ingredients didn't quite mix well with one another. So ultimately, there's a strong substratum of Hindu nationalism, which was always there in Indian nationalism, and which is still there with us today. And my basic point is, you can go back to the 40s when Azad was a Congress president, and you actually see he didn't have very much power, Even his own correspondence was being vetted by Nehru, so...
No, that's wrong.
Okay, so
I have it in the archives.
I'm going to have to
That's
come
a
in
terrible
here.
thing to say, and I strongly disagree with it. I want you to prove it.
Yeah, you can look at the transfer of power papers, which go back to the
Maulana Azad was
1940s.
illiterate. he was an illiterate fool
I'm
who
going to
wanted
have
be.
to. I'm
How can
sorry,
you say
sirs.
that?
I'm going to have to
I'm
come
not
in
questioning
here.
his
and-
literacy.
No. You see,
I'm questioning who wrote those letters.
My idea about these leaders,
this is a debate that
whosoever
can-
is, I have my respect.
I mean,
I may disagree with their ideas,
stop.
but I will venerate
Okay.
them.
I
Disagree
think-
with
I
them,
think all of
if we
us-
can
but not
just-
denigrate
All of us
them.
agree on one
All
broad
of
point
us-
that Nehru and Azad were progressives who were surrounded by conservatives. I think both of you would.
Yeah, that's the basic point of nationalism. I mean, it has to tie so many forces together to create this enemy, and inevitably, the enemy is going to be something that possibly doesn't really exist or is caricatured completely.
Unfortunately, this is a very naive thing to say. Very, very naive. You have to understand, you have to go and read, decide after reading much more than what you have read till now. Sorry.
So I mean, we're gonna have to take this debate off stage at some point. But I'm going to sort of dial us all back quite a few steps and take us to sources, because when we're writing political lives, sources and archives become incredibly important. So I want to ask each of you what kind of sources you refer to. Was there a difficulty in accessing some of these sources, a difficulty in gaining access to certain people who might be crucial to the telling of these stories and of the timelines that you're talking about? I mean, in Vajpayee's case, the RSS is notoriously sort of reserved about talking about its inner workings. And in your case, Pratinav, you've talked about how in your book, the most stunning thing that came across for you was the silence of the sources. So in your case, how did you get that silence to speak for you? So I'd like to start with Abhishek first.
I think I am uniquely cursed in this matter because both of them research on subjects where they have really rich archives. Mine was, I was like a tramp, really. I was like a tramp, homeless tramp gathering stale food and, picking up cigarette butts for a hit. I'm not even kidding. And this is how I picked up little bit of material here and there, a photograph here, a letter there, something dope here, something really minor work there. And that's how, that was part of the reason it took me so many years. But I'll
how did you pick up that dope?
Huh?
How did you pick up that cigarette butt and that dope? That
Right. No, but I want to talk about lack of private papers for a biographers is a very, very serious handicap. And that is one. And I also think it's not, because in this case, it was not my fault that Mr. Vajpayee's private papers are not out, but I would also take 2 steps back. And I think it's a larger failure of public culture, of intellectual culture in India. I mean, even any half-decent democracy releases private papers of its state heads. In India, after the 60s, we barely have anything. We don't even have Indira Gandhi's private papers. We don't have Rajiv Gandhi's private papers. We don't even have the basic IB archives, the intelligence archives. We know nothing about the RNAW archives. Any third-rate democracy releases these things. And this is not even a BJP problem. I mean, these people are very secretive, but this has been an old problem, and it's coming to bite us because, and what happens is historians don't have enough material to write, and which is why you see often politicians and there are quite a few of here, politicians and retired diplomats and bureaucrats. I mean, I apologize, but most of them end up writing third-rate books about they end up writing memoirs, third-rate books. Yeah, I mean, there are some respectable exceptions. I mean, I like Dulat's book on Vajpayee, the Kashmir, the Vajpayee years, despite all its flaws. But by and large, most of them are third-rate books. It's like a dying man's desperate plea to be remembered for a few years. It's an ego trip. So these are the problems. But in my case, I think I also struggled on account of Sangh Parivar's own, Sangh Parivar always uses, I mean, in the early decades, they functioned like a secretive society. And they used misinformation as a conscious political tool. And which is why, beyond a point, it doesn't reveal you much. You can get facts, who went where, did what. But in terms of what they're planning, they're very, very secretive. And I don't, in many ways, now they are open because they have power. They can do whatever they want. But in those days, researching early decades is very tricky. And what happens is that I didn't have private papers, and you can't trust their own mouthpieces. So you end up, the tramping I was talking about, you have to look at it really increases your work by 5 times. So I am uniquely cursed, unfortunately, in that sense. I have promised myself that I will never again touch a political biography in my life, and I really mean it without prior papers. You can hold me accountable if I'm wrong.
Professor
Well,
Habib. Sorry, it's Professor. In terms of what papers, sources, was
See,
it
for
easy
me,
for you?
like Pratinav faced a different sort of problem, and I agree with all his problems, and these are genuine concerns because the issue he was trying to deal with is not very easy to handle, and it was a life which was very close to our present. My concerns go back, like Maulana Azad goes back a couple of years, decades from now. Most of his writings are in Urdu, and fortunately I had some skills in that language which I could handle, and I don't have to depend on the translators because most of the writings in English, people depend on translators, so that I didn't have to do. So one could read and enjoy reading it, the original, and then of course translate it. There were still material which was translated. Second thing, most important thing while I was doing it, while I signed the contract with my publishers, COVID came in between. For 2 years, travel was almost impossible. Libraries were almost inaccessible. So I had to leave quite a few things which I had already planned originally to see in Calcutta in the Teen Murti library, which remained closed for quite some time. Private papers, which I saw in the beginning. Fortunately, I had access to archives before, so I had a large number of files with me, so I could use that. Besides that, there were some discussions with people who had some memories of Maulana Azad. And there were some old people around, so I had a couple of discussions with them. Like Gulzar Dehlvi, one of our well-known poets, he died a couple of years ago, who had very close association with Maulana Azad. And he had lots of stories to tell about, like Maulana was known as somebody who believed in Naqshbandi Sufi philosophy, like his father, and not a Chishti Sufi order, where you believe in music, where you believe in all sorts of sama and other things which are associated with Chishti order in Nizamuddin Auliya and Moinuddin Chishti's Ajmer. Gulzar went to him once because Hassan Nizami, from Nizamuddin Auliya, wanted to celebrate Amir Khusro's Jashn, and he wanted Maulana Azad to be there. So he requested Gulzar because he believed that Gulzar is close to him, and Maulana will not agree to come and participate in a Jashn of a Sufi saint poet like Amir Khusro. He went to him and he said, you have participated in my Ghalib Jashn, in my Mir Jashn, and so many other Jashns I have organized. This is on Amir Khusro. Will you come? Initially he said no, and then he came. He said, I will stay only for 45 minutes. He said, okay. He went there. He stayed for full 2 hours. He spoke for more than 1 hour on Amir Khusro, his poetry, his music, his impact on India, his cultural interface with Hinduism, all that. And when Qawwali was about to begin, Gulzar went to Maulana Azad. He said, Huzur, ab aap ja sakte hain, agar chahe. So this was his. He said, no, I will continue to sit. He sat for 15 minutes more and went away. So these are few things which I could, like, as part of oral history, could get, and I've used it in my book as well, some references. So for me, my difficulties were not like Abhishek's. I had access to libraries, lots of his writings, and all those one could read. The only thing is one need to interpret all those things, how you see them, how you read them. And I have done it in my own way, and one can call it hagiography, but it is a sympathetic biography. You can write a hostile biography, you can write a sympathetic biography, and you can write a hagiography. I disagree with him on so many things. Like he says that Muslims in India, the believers actually are to be blamed, not faiths. Muslims have to go back and read the original Quran. Now, he is a scholar of Islam. He knows his mother tongue is Arabic. His father was a scholar himself. He inherited lots of things which an ordinary Muslim can't claim. Ordinary Muslim is dependent on the mullah, whatever he interprets or tells him. Similarly, for Hinduism, hardly any shlok is understood by all Hindus. They just sit and listen to it. But in Islam, there is a difference. Islam is a religion of book, while Hinduism has no such pretensions. It's an open-handed religion, which is being Semitized now. Unfortunately, one God, one book, and all sorts of other things happening. But Islam has that sort of weakness. All Semitic religions have. So, in that context, Maulana Azad tried to open up when he's writing his Tarjuman al-Quran. He gave a different idea of Islam and tried to explain that Islam can be any other faith, like any other faith. Thank you.
Right, I'll keep this short because we want to hear from you as well at some point. So I've never quite found it, I've never thought it a big trouble, finding sources. Indianists like whinging about the lack of sources and so on, but I've been perfectly fine with newspapers and letters, and you're quite right, most of the memoirs by politicians are appalling, but that's precisely why I love them, I mean...
But that can't be a substitute to proper history. And
not to letters, but most politicians are narcissists, and they don't quite realize when they're making absolute fools of themselves.
I have no issues with them writing their memoirs. Honestly,
right.
I have no issues with them writing their memoirs. The problem is in the lack of archives. Historians can't write history. I mean, right now you can write a history of the 50s or 60s. Imagine how would we manage 50 years from now? Because this culture is not going to change. I mean, first generation, Nehru was progressive and Azad was progressive, and they kept the private papers. But if we do not have enough archives, how do we write history 50 years from now?
Right, just one remark about Azad's memoirs, and I know this is going to rile you up, but I'm going to say it anyway. So 30 pages of Azad's memoirs were redacted by the great secularist that was Nehru, and they were only opened up in 1988, 30 years after that. So, we have a long history of authoritarian behavior on the part of our rulers. Thank you.
Okay, so I think based on all of your answers, I think there's a larger question here about the sort of the perils of sticky territory around the subjects that we choose to write, because in the case of Vajpayee and Azad in particular, I think for biographies per se, there are gray areas in human nature. There are areas that might be embarrassing or awkward. How, as a biographer, do you navigate writing something that could possibly be difficult to write about, and something that could be possibly controversial, which, does happen when you are writing?
Mental way is a serious test of a biographer's craft.
Yeah.
And also in my case, people I was writing about were dead. But none of the books that came out on Hindu Right or Vajpayee were, talked about any of them, or about Sangh Parivar's complex relationship with sexuality. All pracharaks are supposed to be celibate. Mr. Vajpayee was a pracharak in the early decades. But I do think I tried my best to write about it in a very unsentimental, unemotional way, not to say insensitive way. And I think even though that was not the aim, I think all the people I wrote about, I did not deny agency to any of the people I wrote about. And I do think they all come out looking good. I mean, even though the family grudges me for spilling out certain details.
But you felt it was necessary to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, I think it also introduces an element of broad-mindedness, Narayani. I think I wanted the world to know that, politicians also can have complicated private lives. It's perfectly normal to have complex private lives. And in Mr. Vajpayee's case, you can anyways not get away with it because, and this is what I deal with in the second volume, and it has caused a lot of confusion. Why? The reason why I could not write was that his family was very, very intimately involved in the functioning of the PMO during Vajpayee years. So how do you go about it? And I mean, for how long do you keep talking about it in terms of, adopted child or Dattak Putri? Like his family was managing in many ways, he was managing his office in a very tight way. So I thought, okay, the only way I would go about it in a very blunt way from page 1. So I don't have to, issue clarifications later. So that was my approach. And I also think in his case, I think it becomes necessary partly because of trauma during his early youth. Both his parents died of cancer, and even though, the family was scattered, the brothers were not getting along. And even when Vajpayee succeeded as a politician, he became a political celebrity. Emotionally, he was always very lonely and desolate. And that was where the entry of Rajkumari Kaul helped. She gave him an emotional anchor. She gave him a sense of family. And we don't understand that, a political career is an extremely, extremely volatile career. I mean, we don't get a sense of it. And he desperately, at that point of time, he was in late 30s, he needed someone. He needed a family life. And that's when she entered his life. And yeah, they had a lifelong relationship, and it was a beautiful relationship. Yeah.
Professor Habib.
Yeah, for me, like Vajpayee ji, I understand Abhishek's issues, but his life was almost lived in a very hush-hush manner. Lots of things we knew, lots of things we did know. But in the case of Maulana Azad, he actually, in his writings, accepted lots of his weaknesses, shared a large number of things which he did in his life, which as an Islamic scholar he was not supposed to do. And he was courageous enough to accept lots of things in his writings in public. Now, when I was writing, like once S. Gopal in his biography of Nehru referred to a very interesting question which Gandhi raised. Mahatma Gandhi asked Nehru, I've heard that Maulana drinks. Huh? So Nehru's answer, just 3-4 words. So what? I also drink. That was the end of the story. And Gandhi never raised it again. And no question was raised again. Nobody saw him drinking. If he did, he was a solitary drinker. So nobody can claim that he shared a jam with him. Never. But there was a story, and he wrote himself. He said, what do you talk about drink? I've done so many other things in my life which are worse than drinking. So forget about this. So he repeatedly writes, and there was a love affair he shares with people in his memoirs, that he fell in love with a woman called Atiya in Bombay, and he never wrote about it in what exactly he wanted to do. He was a married man already, and people assume that probably he wanted to continue that relationship outside the marriage, or he had decided to marry her, whatever. But nothing happened. He forgot about her later on, and nothing could be concluded. But there is a story which he himself narrates. So there are lots of things which he shared, which people who are writing about him, people like me and others, they have used. Some people have not used it very explicitly. I have done it. And so these questions, like he's smoking. He smoked in public. I think he's the only political figure who dared to smoke in front of Mahatma Gandhi. Nobody else did. There are photos, like once I wrote a piece for Hindu, a longish one, and Hindu brought out a photo from the archives, and where Gandhi is sitting next to Maulana Azad, and there is a ashtray, and Maulana has a cigarette in his hand. So this is something which he did, and which he shared. He did in public many times, and many things he shared which he did in private. So we have access to lots of things of his private life. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this has been a very feisty session, but I'm going to open the floor for questions. And there are plenty. I think we should take 3 at a time, and because front row.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us. My question is for Professor Habib specifically, and it's sort of 2 parts. The first is, do you think there's a reason why the ideology of Maulana Azad, or sort of Congress in general, became less appealing to the Ashraf classes? Was it a byproduct of colonial divide and rule? Was it Islamic reform, or is there something else going on? And then secondly, do you believe there's sort of a point of no return in this ideology being able to provide a sense of safety or security for Indian Muslims, or is it just sort of political happenstance, partition happens because of a number of uncontrollable factors, and so we're left with 2 states? Thank you.
You see, when you talk of, like people say, that Maulana Azad lost the cause of United India, and that's true. But the point is, Muslim League used the ideology of division of the country in the name of Islam as a divisive ideology on the basis of instigating fear among the people, like fear from the majority. Once the British go, the majority will just subdue you. You will have no future, you will have no job, you will have no business, you have no life. You will be insecure. So that was something which was spread among people, and this idea was bought mostly by the privileged, who were landed, who were feudal, who belonged to the feudal class, who were employed, who were haves, not have-nots. Socially also, who were on the higher side. All of them got affected by the Muslim League, and this idea was spread from 1906, when it was founded, till 1947. The first experiment.
Why partition violence then, if it was just the upper classes and the Ashraf?
So mostly Ashraf were affected by it. The Ajlaf, the backward, the Pasmanda Muslims were affected marginally because they were affected by violence, by fear, and most of them, quite a few of them, left India and went to Pakistan because of fear. But majority of them, that's why we have such a large number of Muslims still in India, were left behind. And I see this as a victory of Maulana Azad and others. Another thing, I want to raise here, which I should have said earlier. Muslim League and Muhammad Ali Jinnah in particular tried to prove that Maulana Azad was a showboy of the Congress. And he used it. He was a Hindu agent in the Congress party. He's a Muslim agent, Hindu agent. On behalf of the Hindus, he's trying to push Muslims to the Congress party. Idea was to show to the world that it is only the Maulana Azad and few others who are trying to speak the cause of United India. All other Muslims are with us, which is not true. There was Allah Baksh Samru, who in 1940 organized Azad Muslim Conference in Delhi in 1940, after the Muslim League had passed a two-nation theory resolution already. That conference was attended by 1 lakh Muslims in Delhi in 1940, just 7 years before. Maulana Azad couldn't even participate in that conference. And you go and read what this Allah Baksh Samru speaks about two-nation theory, how he denigrates the idea of dividing India. And All India Movement Conference, RR Party, so many others, who were all against Muslim League's division of the country.
But tell us about the 1946 election and how that panned out.
1946 election, not like people talk about election, how Muslim League won so many seats here. People have no idea. They don't go and see that what was the franchise. Franchise was a limited franchise. It was not universal franchise. It's only the educated, only the privileged among Hindus and Muslims who had a right to vote. And all the privileged Muslims voted for Muslim League. So that won't give you an idea that all Muslims are with Muslim League, because they had no idea to vote. You don't even understand. You don't want to go into the details of that and just say sweepingly that Azad lost the cause or the nationalist Muslims lost the cause, which is not true.
I think, are there any other questions that we do? We do. Okay, so We're running out of time, so we're going to take 3 questions at a time, I think. Second row? Not second row, 4th row, I think. Yeah.
Hello. So my question is to Pratinav. Pratinav, do you think we Indians go extra reverential when political, heads die? Is it a uniquely Indian phenomena that we become very nice to, the dead politicians?
Well, I think most societies have some form of...
We're just going to take one more question because we're running out of time with the lady.
Hello, excuse me for asking this, but it is a controversial question. Mahatma Gandhi was also having a life which he himself wrote as in experiments with truth.
Right.
So what do you have to say, Abhishek?
He wrote about it himself.
Yeah, himself.
Yeah, so
There are letters, there are evidences. So no liberal talks about that openly.
no, people do. I mean, most biographies of
Just a second. I think
Gandhi-
Pratinav will answer first because
Sure,
we
sure,
go
sure.
according.
Fine.
Well, to keep it very brief, all societies have some form of hierarchy or another. We have a particularly egregious one, which comes from the caste system, and I think we need to challenge that first if we have to go anywhere in building a proper democracy.
So Abhishek, did you want to answer? Yeah, we're completely out of time, but do you want to answer the lady or
No, about Gandhi, you read any of the all the biographies, major biographies of Gandhi do mention it. So I don't think, my friend Pratinav did not like Ram Guha's biography, but even that mentions about his extramarital affair with Sarla Devi Chaudhrani, the brief one. And Gandhi was himself, he's himself written about his experiments. I do not agree with the experiments, of course, but all I'm saying is he's himself documented it. Most politicians do not write about their private lives in the public. So at the very least, we should give him slight credit for the fact that he documented his own life in such detail. Yeah, for the basic honesty, basic sincerity.
Okay, on that note, we're going to have to end this session.